President Trump's campaign claims Joe Biden politicizes tragedy. That message to supporters went out around the same time Mr. Trump visited St. John's Episcopal Church on Monday. Communications Director Tim Murtaugh tweeted out this photo of the president walking from the White House to Lafayette Square. Mr. Trump tweeted that D.C. had, quote, no problems on Monday night and touted many arrests, overwhelming force, and domination. CBS News campaign reporter Nicole Sganga and CBS News political contributor Leslie Sanchez join me now. Welcome. It's good to see both of you. Nicole, let me begin with you. We have heard the president blame outside groups, along with mayors and governors, for what he sees as a failure to dominate the protests. Let's listen to what Joe Biden had to say earlier today.
But I promise you this. I won't traffic in fear and division. I won't fan the flames of hate. I'll seek to heal the racial wounds that have long plagued our country, not use them for political gain.
Nicole, this is very clearly a sharp contrast when you look at these very different messages.
Of course, and earlier today, Elaine, we heard from the president's campaign on this. They've been posting videos of President Trump's speech about law and order. I actually had a moment to speak with former speechwriters from the Clinton and Bush administrations who showed me the differences in the rhetoric between Joe Biden and, what President Trump had stated yesterday from the Rose Garden. You'll notice that President Trump brought up law and order quite a lot. He did mention George Floyd, of course, twice, but he didn't really get at problems around police brutality in this country, nor what protesters outside were feeling, not really expressing very much sympathy towards some of that. Of course, he said he was an ally to peaceful protesters, but at the same time, law enforcement outside the White House gates was clearing out protesters using tear gas canisters and, deploying flashbangs. So, while the president's allies and his supporters really love this message of law and order, feel, that it riles up his base and that they are disturbed by seeing the riots and the protests on television, truly a contrast between the more sympathetic language we're hearing from former Vice President Joe Biden.
Nicole, have any of the president's Republican allies spoken about his visit to St. John's Church?
We've heard, from the Trump campaign. I talked to several GOP chairmen today who told me they loved what they heard. I've also heard from, Trump donors and former campaign officials that feel as though what the country needs right now is a healer in chief, but also say that that's never been President Trump's MO. That's never been, his style. There are Republicans who have privately expressed concerns that the president's remarks on Twitter are undercutting the White House message and the campaign message here. We know that the Trump campaign previous to this has really touted the president's support of criminal justice reform in an effort to reach out to African Americans in the Black community. But again, it is relatively quiet when it comes to the president's move to go to St. John's Church yesterday.
Leslie, let me turn to you. We saw that head-to-head matchup with Joe Biden leading President Trump nationally by 4 points. Should down-ballot Republicans be concerned about that at this point in an election year?
There's a tremendous difference, Elaine, and I think a lot of the points that were just made speak to this between what is now the Trump Republican Party and the older, inside Washington, they would say, establishment party. And that fissure, that delta is becoming extremely wide. If you talk to base Republicans, they would be labeled establishment Republicans. There is a healthy fear, if not concern, about what this ticket looks like. Are there tailcoats in the traditional sense of a presidential candidate down ballot? And there really aren't. If you're truly somebody who falls in line with the president and he does endorse you by Twitter or whatever, then certainly the pocketbook's open and there's a tremendous flood of cash for these campaigns in most cases. But for the tried and true who have fallen in line and been in Republican politics for a long time, it's still unclear what 2020 is going to look like, especially in the turbulent age and the pall of the pandemic and an economic recovery we're in.
Leslie, before we go, I want to get your take on some of the rhetoric that we have been hearing from President Trump in the wake of these protests that we've been seeing across the country. Can you give us some context here? Is there a strategy that is meant to reach out to a particular group of people, i.e. perhaps members of his base, who may be watching some of what's unfolding and are trying to make sense of it like the rest of us? But is there some sort of actual political strategy, or is this just a message that is improvised and, in some Republicans' view even, leaving somewhat a little bit to be desired? One person said that the tweets, for instance, earlier this week, they were not what they would call uniting or comforting.
No, they're not. The president has never been that way. If anything, that's the criticism myself, many people who've been in Republican politics have had for a very long time. It's the tone of the president, the style, the abrasiveness, how brutish it is. And that, in many ways, is what is defining this outside party that is the new Republican Party. And it is that disconnect, Elaine, between what Republicans who are in Washington, who've been elected, who are on Capitol Hill, there's not a lot of daylight policy-wise between themselves and the Democrats, minus the kind of AOC, the extreme left of the Democratic Party. Policy-wise, there's not a lot of big movement compared to what Trump is doing. Trump is saying this is I'm going to go in the law and order direction. Some conservatives tell me he's given them more in terms of judges and protecting religious freedoms, for example, with evangelical Christians than they ever anticipated from a Republican president. And that's why they're standing in line with him again in 2020. It's a massive fissure again within the Republican base itself. And that's why the president has no choice but to go law and order. I think, people on the conservative side, some of them have called him the crybaby in chief. I've called the president escalator in chief because he escalates any situation to its most unreasonable outcome in most cases. But for the base, they want that type of fighter. This is about style. And the president's hoping he can get the economy moving again. And he's going to focus again on China, that external threat, as we get closer and closer to November, and we're going to see how that falls.
All right, Nicole Sganga and Leslie Sanchez, great to have you both. Thanks very much.
Thank you.